Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be tackling The Joy of Sacrifice.
Oh, interesting title.
Right, a book that might just flip your whole idea of sacrifice on its head.
Yeah, sacrifice, it's usually not associated with joy.
No, not at all. And our guide in this exploration is a longtime figure in the human potential movement, E.J. Gold.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah. He's kind of a shamanic rabbi, you might say.
Interesting.
Who also, and this is interesting, he wrote The American Book of the Dead, which is a modern take on the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Oh, wow.
So we're definitely in for a thought-provoking journey here.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about The Joy of Sacrifice specifically is that Gold lays out a very specific system of 18 sacrifices. 18 sacrifices, yeah. Each designed to help us shed layers of, well, he calls it the psyche. All those conditioned patterns and beliefs that keep us from experiencing our true essence.
Right, so this isn't just giving up chocolate for Lent or something.
No. We're talking about something way deeper.
Some serious inner work.
Exactly. And one of the things that makes this book so unique, it's not just your typical self-help step-by-step guide.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's got these letters from various deities woven throughout.
It is.
Yeah, which adds this whole other mystical dimension to it.
Like, who are we talking about here?
Well, there's one from Mazar-e-Sharif, for example.
Interesting.
And I think these letters really highlight this idea that true sacrifice is about conscious effort. It's about actively participating in our own evolution.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like we're not just passive recipients of some kind of grace or something like that.
Right. And there's actually a quote from one of the letters that really captures this. I think it's from one of the first couple letters. It says, "It is true that there are many practices which seem to offer salvation, but in reality, only man can redeem himself."
Wow, I like that.
It's about taking responsibility, doing the inner work.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah, and it seems that Gold is very clear that he's not talking about just superficial displays of suffering,
not just self-flagellation.
or self-denial for its own sake.
Right.
It's about a much deeper inner transformation, and that's where I think the concept of the corridor of madness comes in.
Uh-oh. Corridor of madness.
Yeah, Gold says it's this really challenging period of transition where the psyche is essentially eaten by the essence.
Okay, that sounds intense.
Yeah, so imagine, all those comfortable, habitual ways of being just stripped away, and you're left with this raw, undeveloped essence.
Sort of like a complete breakdown of your old self.
Exactly. So how do these 18 sacrifices actually lead us through that corridor?
Well, each sacrifice builds upon the previous one.
Okay.
Gradually preparing us for that ultimate breakdown and rebirth, you could say.
Got it. Well, there are 18 of them, so we obviously can't cover every single one.
Yeah, I would be here all day.
But let's dive into a few that I think might really resonate with our listeners.
Okay, sure.
What about the sacrifice of comfort?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right. This one is particularly relevant, I think, today.
Yeah, especially with
given the whole
minimalist thing.
Minimalist movement and this interest in self-discipline.
Right.
Gold describes a lifestyle that's incredibly austere.
Right.
Simple dress, regulated activities, very few possessions.
Wow. So like really stripping it down to the bare essentials?
Yeah, so you might consider incorporating elements of austerity into your own life, like maybe simplifying your wardrobe, cutting back on unnecessary possessions,
Yeah.
Just kind of think about how embracing a bit of discomfort could potentially lead to greater inner peace.
Interesting thought.
And then there's the sacrifice of habits, which is directly tied to preparing for that corridor of madness.
Right.
Because in that state, you're essentially left with only your deeply ingrained habits.
So if you want to change your life, you have to change your habits first.
Yeah, it really makes you think about those patterns that are driving your life.
Yeah.
And then speaking of challenging habits, there's the sacrifice of sanity.
Oh, the sacrifice of sanity. That's an interesting one.
This one is really intriguing. So could you elaborate a bit on what Gold means by thinking with one's feelings? I mean, do we actually have to go crazy?
Not in the literal clinical sense.
Okay, good.
It's more about surrendering to a state where the undeveloped essence takes control. Gold describes it as almost childlike behavior, being able to think with one's feelings, as he puts it.
So kind of tapping into that intuitive, primal part of ourselves.
Right.
That often gets buried under all the layers of social conditioning.
Exactly. And then there's the sacrifice of the guru.
Okay.
This is a truly mind-bending concept.
Okay, I'm always up for a good mind-bending concept. Tell me more.
In this sacrifice, the individual actually acts as the guru, receiving homage and dispensing wisdom.
Wait, so I'm playing the role of the enlightened teacher.
In a sense, yes.
That's a fascinating idea.
It's about recognizing that ultimately the true guidance comes from within.
Right.
We have to relinquish reliance on those external authorities. And I think this ties into the overall goal of all these sacrifices, which is to reach the sacrifice of existence.
So, returning to ordinary life, but with a completely transformed perspective.
Yes.
It's not about escaping the world,
Right.
but about coming back to it with a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in it, I guess.
Exactly. But Gold doesn't suggest we go through this transformation alone.
Right.
He talks about the role of the school in providing support and guidance.
Okay, so is this like a physical place, an actual institution? What exactly is the school?
Not necessarily a physical place.
Exactly.
It's more of a community, a support system, and there are very specific rules and ethics that govern this school.
Rules and ethics, okay, interesting.
Yeah, like for instance, one of the key principles is hospitality.
Okay.
So guests are given the highest priority in this school,
Oh, interesting.
even if it means sacrificing your own comfort.
So less about personal gain and more about selfless service.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's this concept of wandering,
Wandering.
which isn't just about physical travel,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
about seeking out new experiences, challenging your assumptions,
Yeah.
not getting too attached to any one place or way of thinking.
It's like intellectual and spiritual exploration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But with all this talk about, schools and sacrifices and all,
Yeah.
it's easy to wonder if this path is only for a select few,
I was going to say.
Like, can regular people benefit from these teachings?
Yeah, especially those of us who weren't part of some formal tradition or something.
That's a great question, and I think Gold would say absolutely yes.
Okay, good.
Remember, he emphasizes that the school is not about dogma or blind belief.
Right.
It's about creating the right conditions for self-work.
And those conditions, to a large extent, we can create in our own lives.
Exactly.
That's encouraging.
So I think one of the things that comes up a lot with this book is people want to know
How do we even...
how to approach.
Yeah, how to approach.
Something like the sacrifice of sanity.
Yeah.
In a safe and healthy way.
Right.
And that's where discernment comes in. I mean, Gold is very clear that these sacrifices are not meant to be undertaken lightly.
Right, of course.
They require careful preparation and guidance.
Yeah.
And even then, there's always a risk, he says, of what he calls falling into the trap of vanity.
A vanity.
Yeah, like thinking you've somehow achieved something special just by enduring hardship.
So it's not about suffering for the sake of suffering.
No, it's about something else.
It seems like there's a fine line between really pushing ourselves and taking things too far.
Yeah, that's why the discernment is so important.
Right.
It's about stripping away the inessential,
Yeah.
the ego-driven attachments that prevent us from seeing our true nature.
So how do we know when we're on the right track?
Well, Gold talks about the importance of developing what he calls conscience,
Conscience.
which he describes as an understanding of objective suffering.
Objective suffering. So it's not about judging ourselves or feeling guilty.
And not at all.
It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings, and cultivating compassion for ourselves and others.
So moving beyond just a self-centered perspective. Exactly.
And tapping into a deeper sense of empathy and understanding.
Yeah, and that understanding, that compassion, can serve as a guiding force as we navigate those challenges of the path.
Okay.
It helps us to see beyond our own limited perspective, to act in a way that benefits the whole.
And that makes me think back to the title of the book, The Joy of Sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he's saying that there's a profound sense of fulfillment
Yeah.
that comes from consciously choosing to let go of the things that are holding us back.
And not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all.
Right. So the true joy lies in realizing that our individual journey is part of something much larger than ourselves.
Something that transcends our personal desires and limitations.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here,
Really?
from the school and the sanctuary to the importance of cultivating compassion and surpassing our limits.
Right.
I'm still a bit curious, though, about the whole corridor of madness thing.
Yeah.
What are some of the signs that someone might be approaching that stage of transformation?
Yeah, and how do we navigate it in a way that's both safe and transformative? That's a great question, and I think that's probably on a lot of our listeners' minds.
It is.
So that's actually something we're going to explore in more depth in the final part of our deep dive into the joy of sacrifice.
Okay, so stay tuned. because we're about to go even deeper into the heart of Gold's system.
Yeah, that's right.
We'll be discussing how to recognize the signs of the corridor of madness. And we'll explore practical tools for navigating that intense phase of transformation.
I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so we've been exploring E.J. Gold's The Joy of Sacrifice.
Yes.
And we've touched on some pretty intense concepts.
We have.
Especially that whole corridor of madness thing.
Right.
So I think it's time to really unpack that a bit.
Okay, yeah, let's do that.
What are some signs that someone might be entering that phase? And how do we navigate it, safely?
Yeah, that's a question that I think a lot of people grapple with when they're engaging with Gold's work.
Right.
Because it is he describes it as this period where the psyche, the ego, is being broken down, making way for the true essence to emerge. And it can be a time of great upheaval,
So not exactly a walk in the park.
No, not necessarily.
What might that look like, in someone's life?
Well, Gold emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all answer to that question.
Right, sure.
But some common signs might include, a sense of disorientation, a questioning of previously held beliefs, maybe even a feeling of losing control.
Like the ego's being challenged in a really profound way.
Exactly. And there's bound to be some resistance there.
Right.
So it's not necessarily about literally going mad,
right,
but more about this kind of breakdown of our usual ways of perceiving and interacting with the world.
Right, like those old patterns are starting to crumble.
Exactly. And this can manifest in a lot of different ways. Some people might experience emotional volatility, others might withdraw from social interactions. So it's important to remember that everyone's journey is unique.
Okay, so let's say someone is recognizing these signs in themselves. How do they navigate this corridor without getting completely lost in the process?
Well, that's where I think all the practices we've been discussing become even more crucial.
Yeah.
The sacrifice of comfort, the sacrifice of habits, the sacrifice of sanity. All of these things are actually preparations for this more intense phase of transformation.
It's like we're building this foundation of resilience and self-awareness before we enter that more turbulent territory.
Exactly. And Gold does offer some pretty specific guidance for navigating this period.
Okay, like what?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of cultivating a sense of humor, for one thing.
Humor in the midst of all this intensity.
Yeah, I know. It sounds kind of strange. But he sees humor as a way of detaching from the seriousness of the ego, like not taking ourselves too seriously.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of these profound changes, there's still room for lightness and joy.
Okay, I like that. He also talks about, focusing on handcrafts, movements, things that ground us in the body.
Right, because these activities can really help to shift our attention away from the mental and emotional turmoil that might be arising during this phase.
So instead of getting caught up in the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, we can find a sense of stability through that connection with the body.
Exactly. And this ties back to the importance of cultivating a regular practice, whether it's meditation, yoga, spending time in nature. All these things can help us to build that foundation of inner peace and resilience that can support us through the challenges of the corridor.
But I think it's important to acknowledge that even with all the preparation and support in the world, this process can still be pretty daunting.
Absolutely.
This is not something to be undertaken lightly.
And Gold is very clear about that.
Yeah.
He emphasizes the importance of seeking guidance from a qualified teacher or mentor, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure about how to proceed.
Right, because as much as we can learn and grow from books like this, there's no substitute for that human connection. Someone who can really provide personalized support and guidance.
Right. And that's where the school concept, even if it's not a formal institution, really comes into play.
Yeah.
It's about finding that community of support, whether it's a group of friends, a spiritual group, even an online forum.
Right.
The point is to connect with others who are on a similar path and who can offer that encouragement and understanding.
That's a really valuable reminder. And I think it speaks the importance of cultivating a sense of humility throughout this whole process.
Yeah.
Like we're not meant to do this alone.
Absolutely. And that humility is essential for navigating the corridor of madness too. It's about acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, that we're going to make mistakes along the way, and that's okay.
So embracing that sense of not knowing.
Yeah.
Being open to the unexpected turns that the journey might take.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's what the corridor of madness is all about. It's a willingness to surrender control, to let go of our rigid ideas about who we are and what our lives should look like.
So it sounds like a really profound process of letting go stripping away all that's inessential to reveal our true essence.
Exactly. And while it can be challenging, even painful at times, it's also incredibly liberating.
Yeah, because on the other side of that corridor
Yeah,
lies a deeper sense of peace, joy, and fulfillment.
absolutely.
It's like we're sacrificing those limited versions of ourselves
Mm,
to make way for something much greater, something more authentic and aligned with our true purpose.
that's a beautiful way to put it. And it's a reminder that the joy of sacrifice isn't about deprivation or suffering, but about the freedom that comes from letting go of what no longer serves us.
And that freedom, that sense of liberation, it seems like that's the ultimate reward of this journey.
I think so.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive.
Yes,
I think we've explored some pretty deep waters here,
we have.
but hopefully it sparked some new insights and maybe even inspired you to explore these ideas a bit further.
Remember, this is just a starting point.
Right.
Gould's book is such a rich source of wisdom and guidance, and I encourage everyone to dive into it for yourself.
Yeah, and as you go about your day, maybe ask yourself,
Hmm.
what am I clinging to that might be holding me back from experiencing greater joy and freedom?
Yeah.
What sacrifice am I really ready to make to step more fully into my true potential?
Maybe by consciously letting go,
Yeah,
we might discover a depth of joy that we never knew existed.
that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the joy of sacrifice. We'll catch you next time as we explore new realms of knowledge and self-discovery.